How could a society steeped in the science of racial inferiority reconcile itself to Owen's 4 gold medals? By conceding innate athletic superiority to African Americans while denying them so-called civilized capacities. In the words of American team coach Dean Cromwell, the Negro athlete excelled because he was closer to the primitive. It was not so long ago that his ability to sprint and jump was a life and death matter to him in the jungle.
And star of the squad goes the laurel of a champion.
The competition was grand, and we're very glad to come out on top. Thank you very kindly.
A flurry of debate between racial scientists and those contesting their assumptions greeted Owen's accomplishments.
With the rise of the great Negro athletes in the 1930s, it became this question that there must be a reason that they're great, and that reason must reside in biology rather than in culture or history or circumstance. And Jesse Owens was picked apart.
When the African-American anthropologist and physician Montague Cobb is trying to explain why Jesse Owens was such an outstanding track star, he does so by talking about his body. He talks about his feet, he talks about his legs, his calves, his chest capacity. And he comes to the conclusion, of course, that, you can't say that Negroes have some special characteristics that make them more fit as runners.
Among the few who challenged racial science, Cobb wrote, "There is not one single physical feature, including skin color, which all our Negro champions have in common, which would identify them as Negro." But what marker would identify them as Negro in the first place? Jackie is Asian. Noah as white. Gorgeous as black.
Think about race and its universality. Where is your measurement device? There is no way to measure race. We sometimes do it by skin color. Other people may do it by hair texture. Other people may have the dividing lines different in terms of skin color. What is black in the United States is not what's black in Brazil or what's black in South Africa.
Can't be atoned for previous failures at the plate with that one.
My favorite trivia question in baseball is which Italian-American player for the Brooklyn Dodgers once hit 40 home runs in a season. No one ever gets it right, because the answer is Roy Campanella, who is as Italian as he was black. He had an Italian father and a black mother. He's always classified as black. You see, American racial classification is totally cultural. Who's Tiger Woods? Who's Colin Powell? Colin Powell's as Irish as he is African. Being black has been defined as just looking dark enough that anyone can see you are.
When I was a child, one of the things my father bought me was a set of Time Life books on science. And a book on evolution had in it a skin color scale that went from 1 to 36. And I would spend hours putting my arm against the scale in the book, the picture in the book, trying to figure out what number my color was. And I couldn't quite find myself on the scale.
You can be either 19 or 20. Who would be this color? I'm not 13.
I wonder if it matters how tan you are.
Not 14.
Not 14. You're too pink.
I'd say that John and Noah, both white by appearance, and Jackie and I both fit under the Asian classification. But I guess the thing that surprised me was with the skin color test, what should you technically call the entire group?
I would never know that all our skin colors are so similar. Exactly, like we match.
Should you call them all white, or should you call them 11 to 15? you know?
Wow, maybe lighter than those.
I'm white. Would I trade my skin color?
No.
Put
back.
I probably wouldn't trade my skin color. It's something that I've taken for granted. It's also a privilege, I guess. I think 13 is closer.
13 is closer.
Wow. So like all 13.
I know.
There's no profit in denying it, that there is a certain advantage to being white.
Wow, I'm B negative. Yeah.
We all have the same 35,000 or so genes, but over time, mutations caused variations in our DNA. Today, some genes, like those for skin color, come in different forms.
In a few genes that control the colors of melanin in our skin, different alleles, different mutations occurred that were positively selected, so that many of us with very light skin lost the capacity to make dark melanin.
Dark melanin blocks out some ultraviolet light and is found where sunlight is intense. Lighter melanin is found where sunlight is less intense. Scientists debate why this is.
One hypothesis is that it happened because sunlight is essential to have adequate vitamin D. In northern latitudes with very little light during the winter, one needed every bit of light that one could capture in order to be able to have adequate active vitamin D. And children in particular would need to be able to absorb into their skin enough light to have vitamin D present to keep them healthy.
The best way to understand the genetic differences that we find in human populations is that populations differ by distance. And it's a continuous change from one group to another. And one way we can look at this is use the example of skin color. If we were to only look at people in the tropics and people in Norway, we'd come to the conclusion that there's a group of people who have light skin, there's a group of people who have dark skin. But if we were to walk from the tropics to Norway, what we would see is a continuous change in skin tone. And at no point along that trip would we be able to say, oh, this is the place in which we go from the dark race to the light race.
Human biological variation is so complex. There are so many aspects of human variation. So there are many, many ways to begin to explain them.
Variation in some traits, like eye shape, hair texture, whether or not your tongue curls, involves very few genes. And even those genes haven't all been identified. Variation in traits we regard as socially important is much more complicated. Differences in how our brains work, how we make art, how gracefully we move. Genes may contribute to variation in these traits, but to the extent they do, there would be a cascade of genes at work, interacting with each other and the environment in relationships so intricate and complex that science has hardly begun to decipher them.
People are always talking about genes for things. The genes for athletic ability, the genes for making money, the genes for intelligence. And you have to be very careful, even when there are genes that influence those things. To talk about it as genes for them is not so clear.
What makes us different is both those genetic differences that we have between us and also the interaction of that genome with the environment. And the environment is a very, very complicated thing. So when I say, I sort of mean the environment writ large, everything from the environment in the womb to the environment in your school,